Why does Spain own two cities in Morocco? Ceuta and Melilla sit on the coast of North Africa. They are connected by land to Morocco, separated from Spain by the Mediterranean, and surrounded by some of Europe's most heavily guarded borders. Spain says they are ordinary Spanish cities. Morocco says they are occupied territory. These cities were not captured during the modern colonization of Africa. Spain controlled them centuries before France invaded Algeria, before Britain occupied Egypt, and before European powers carved up the continent between themselves. So, how did two cities in Africa become Spanish? And why, more than 500 years later, are Spain and Morocco still arguing over them? Ceuta sits almost within sight of Gibraltar, at the narrow gateway where the Mediterranean meets the Atlantic. Any power interested in trade, invasion or naval control had a reason to want it. In the early 8th century, an Islamic army crossed from this stretch of coast into Iberia and conquered most of the peninsula within only a few years. Its commander was Tariq ibn Ziyad. The rock across the strait still carries his name today. Gibraltar, the mountain of Tariq. For centuries afterward, the strait connected two halves of one world. Then slowly, the balance shifted. Christian kingdoms in Iberia pushed south for generation after generation. And by the late Middle Ages, they had nearly reached the water. Once a war reaches the coastline, it does not have to stop there. In the early 15th century, Portugal was a small kingdom looking for security, trade, and room to expand. Ceuta offered control near the strait, access to African trade, and a chance to carry the war against Muslim powers across the water. In 1415, a Portuguese fleet crossed the strait and took the city. Ceuta became Portugal's first major possession outside Europe. This happened decades before Portuguese ships rounded the southern tip of Africa, reached India, or claimed Brazil. Portugal's overseas empire began with a city visible from Europe. But Ceuta never became the trade prize Portugal expected. Merchants simply moved their business elsewhere. Portugal had captured the gateway, but not the trade passing through it. What remained was an expensive fortress that Portugal could not easily justify abandoning. Meanwhile, the war in Iberia finished what it had started. In 1492, Granada surrendered to Isabella and Ferdinand, and the final Muslim-ruled kingdom in Iberia fell. Spanish leaders feared raids from North African ports and wanted their own foothold across the water. Just 5 years later, forces acting for the Duke of Medina, Sidonia, took Melilla. Ceuta belonged to Portugal. Melilla belonged to Castile. The frontier had crossed the sea, but Ceuta would take a much stranger road to becoming Spanish. In the late 16th century, Portugal's royal line collapsed. Its king died without an heir, and several claimants emerged to take the throne. One of them was Philip II of Spain. Philip had a legitimate dynastic claim. More persuasively, he also had an army. In 1580, Philip became King of Portugal. The two kingdoms were now joined under one crown. Portugal and Spain kept separate laws, institutions, and overseas administrations, but they shared a monarch. Ceuta remained officially Portuguese, although its defense increasingly depended on Spain. After roughly 60 years of shared rule, Portugal rebelled. In 1640, Portuguese nobles crowned the Duke of Braganza and began fighting to restore their independence. Across the Portuguese Empire, territories had to choose which crown they would recognize. Almost everywhere chose Portugal. Ceuta did not. Its garrison and population had grown closer to southern Spain than to a Portugal now fighting for survival. The city remained loyal to the Spanish crown. When Spain finally recognized Portuguese independence in 1668, the treaty ending the conflict formally confirmed Ceuta as Spanish territory. Spain never conquered Ceuta, Portugal did. Spain kept the city Portugal left behind. Even today, Ceuta's flag carries Lisbon's black and white pattern, a small remnant of a history most people crossing the border have no reason to know. By the late 17th century, both Ceuta and Melilla were Spanish. Muslim forces spent years trying to remove them through sieges. Neither city fell. Soldiers brought families. Fortresses grew into towns. Generations of Spaniards were born inside the cities. Then Europe began colonizing the rest of Africa on a much larger scale. During the 19th century, European powers divided almost the entire African continent between themselves. Morocco held out longer than many of its neighbors, but the pressure kept closing in, and just across the strait stood a mirror Spain never much liked looking into. Gibraltar had once been Spanish. Britain captured it during the War of the Spanish Succession, and Spain formally ceded it by treaty in 1713. Britain argued that its sovereignty was recognized by treaty, reinforced by centuries of control, and supported by the overwhelming preference of Gibraltar's population. Spain still wanted it back. To Spain, Gibraltar was Spanish territory occupied by a foreign power. Its physical connection to the Iberian Peninsula mattered more than centuries of British rule. Geography, Spain argued, should outweigh possession. Morocco could make almost the same argument about Ceuta and Melilla. Both cities sit on the African mainland. Both were taken by European armies, and Morocco has never accepted that centuries of Spanish control settle the question any more than Spain accepts that centuries of British control settle Gibraltar's. Spain's answer was to draw a legal line rather than a geographic one. When France and Spain divided Morocco into protectorates during the early 20th century, Spain administered a northern zone but kept Ceuta and Melilla outside it. The protectorate, Spain argued, was Moroccan territory administered by Spain. Ceuta and Melilla were simply Spain. That distinction would decide everything when Morocco became independent. After the Second World War, colonial rule across Africa began to collapse. France ended its protectorate over Morocco in 1956. Spain surrendered its own protectorate soon afterward. Morocco became independent. Ceuta and Melilla did not go with it. Spain's argument was simple. The cities had never been part of the protectorate, so there was nothing to hand back. Morocco's argument was just as simple. European powers had created the legal boundary separating the cities from the surrounding country, and Spain was now using that same boundary to decide what counted as decolonization. Spain kept the cities. Morocco never accepted the decision. For decades, the dispute remained mostly diplomatic. Then, in July of 2002, a handful of Moroccan personnel landed on a tiny, uninhabited islet near Ceuta called Perejil and raised the Moroccan flag. Spain answered with warships and commandos. For several tense days, the two countries moved toward a military confrontation over a rock that neither side appeared to value very much. American mediation helped restore the previous arrangement before anyone was killed. The island itself meant little. What mattered was what surrendering it might imply about every other Spanish possession nearby. Ceuta and Melilla later took on a role nobody in the 15th century could have imagined. They became two of the only places where the European Union shares a land border with Africa. Spain answered with fences, cameras, and patrol roads. But Spain does not control the ground immediately outside those fences. Morocco does, and when Moroccan cooperation weakens, pressure on Spain can rise almost overnight. That became clear in May of 2021. Spain had allowed Brahim Ghali, the leader of the Polisario Front, to enter the country for medical treatment. The Polisario Front seeks independence for Western Sahara, a territory claimed and largely controlled by Morocco. Morocco reacted angrily. Soon afterward, border enforcement around Ceuta relaxed. Thousands of people crossed into the city within days, many wading or swimming around the coastal barriers. Spain called it coercion. Morocco denied using migration as political pressure, but the timing was difficult to ignore. The crisis revealed a basic weakness in Spain's position. Spain controls Ceuta. Morocco controls much of what happens immediately outside it. Morocco may not be able to remove Spain from the city, but a place Portugal captured in the 15th century had become a lever in 21st century diplomacy. Morocco may not control Ceuta, but it can still apply pressure through it. So why does Spain own two cities in Morocco? Because Portugal took Ceuta while the war against Muslim powers in Iberia was still being fought. Because Castile took Melilla shortly after that war ended. Because Ceuta remained with Spain when Portugal restored its independence. Because both cities survived centuries of sieges and political change. And because when Morocco finally became independent, Spain had already placed both cities outside the territory being returned. That explains how Spain kept them. It does not settle whether Spain should have. Spain looks at Gibraltar and says centuries of foreign control cannot erase a claim rooted in geography. Morocco looks at Ceuta and Melilla and asks why that same principle reverses itself the moment the map points south instead of north. More than 500 years later, that question still has no answer. Both countries agree on only a border and two versions of history standing on either side of it